Greetings YouTube, welcome back campaigners. Today, I'm going to do a thing that you shouldn't. My little friend watches me make an idiot of myself for 3 days straight, working on a dice tower I shouldn't have built. It turned out alright in the end, and it functions. But I should just built a tower piece of terrain and use the dice tray. I'd have been better off. Don't do what I'm about to show you. There's going to be a bump here in a second. During the bump, please hit like, share, subscribe, click on those other links, maybe help out the channel. I'd really appreciate that. Today, I'm an idiot for the next, I don't know, however many minutes. Enjoy! Thanks for coming, campaigners.
Here's the dice tray we made in last week's video. I'm going to leave a link up in the upper right hand corner. It's just your basic tray. Today everything we're making is going to be able to attach to the side here so that we can use it as either a dice tray or a dice tower or a piece of terrain. In computer terms, the tower you see me build in a few moments will be my beta prototype. The one you see me holding here, the yellow one, is my alpha prototype. You can see all of my ramps and randomizer angles and the top funnel, and in a moment you'll see the doorway as well. These were what I used to create the general design for the one I build in today's video. This larger square piece you're going to see me lift up here in a moment is the wall section for the lower portion that goes around the dice tray, and that will form part of the keep aspect of this build. It just nestles on top and gravity holds it in place. Now the one I'm building today will not have crenellations. I may add those later. This lower walled section and the top smaller square that I'm showing here that goes to the top portion work just like caps. They just sit on top and gravity holds them in place. They have a beveled under edge to make them look more like medieval castles would back in the day. Once I add crenellations, I may also cut holes called machicolations. Some people call them murder holes. That's where you fire an arrow downward at enemies. But I'm only going to add those on the lower one. There wouldn't be a need to have it on the keep. Now these are just done by, the top one's just a flat square. I may add a trapdoor later. That may just be for look since this is not playable inside. On this bottom one, it's accessed by the door in the tower itself. So this is pretty simple. The lower one's going to have that square cut out of the middle to fit on top of the dice tray. Here I've used the black square from the middle of the dice tray from last week's episode to draw at this square on the bottom of this gray piece. This will be cut out so that when this sits on top, it will leave the opening for the dice tray at the bottom. Now it's being cut into a square right now, and once it's done a little later on after I've got everything attached, I will be cutting a 6-inch section out of the middle of one of these sides so that it butts up against the sides of the tower but is not a full circle of the dice tray. Here I'm attaching 1/4-inch supports all the way around. These go under or inside, or however you want to look at that, the side walls. They do two things. They both support the thinner tapered edge of the side walls, and they also allow for a wider surface so you can more easily fit a figure's base onto the side so that it won't fall off. Now on this portion, after you've got the two longer sides on, you want to make sure that the two shorter sides you measure to fit directly in between there. When you glue this in, you want to make sure to get some glue on the ends of those pieces so they stick. Here I'm accounting for the fact that the yellow portion is thinner than the gray portion, and I want my sidewalls to come down to the level of two gray portions. This spacer I'm placing in here with the tape allows me to have that sit the right height up so I can turn it right side over and glue the walls on at the level I want. Now I'm building the square frame around it. This has a tapered edge on a 1.5-inch wide piece. That's just the height that looked good next to my Mini. that would give them some protection at the top, but once I cut crenellations would give them the right height to shoot from. Now you can see here I've taped all these in squares, and I'm just using hot glue and putting these together and then attaching with the tape. These are a lot more important to have smooth on the top surface than the bottom, so when I'm gluing these together I flip them upside down to make sure that the bottom while I'm gluing, which will become the top, is the level portion. And I simply hot glue these and hold them in place. Now I did the bevels on mine with a saw, but it is on the prototype I used a knife. It is certainly possible to use a knife or a saw on this. However you want to get that bevel in there and works for you, that's going to be great. Now that we've got that frame measured out and glued up, we're going to go ahead and arrange to have that glued onto the frame. Make sure that you put the beveled edge downward. You want to make sure that that's the bottom of your wall, and then the rest of this is pretty straightforward. Just gluing. Put on a hot glue on one side, stick one side of the frame to it, and then continue the way around. You'll have to sort of squidge down into the cracks to get the glue in, but it's pretty straightforward. At this point you can go ahead and pull out these spacers off the bottom. We will not be needing these again. That was their entire purpose for this build. Now that I've got the cover on, I couldn't resist taking it for a test drive with my heaviest die. That's a large metal one. It's my heaviest and biggest. I also checked it against the size of the Mini to make sure that everything was looking good, and I'm really satisfied with this point and ready to move on. Here I am marking out the doors for the front and rear. Those are going to be done a little bit differently from each other. They're going to look the same, except one is going to be blocked off since it's not playable and is going to be behind the ramp where the dice actually roll down. Now on my first prototype, which is what this yellow piece is here, I made it wide enough so that there was 2 inches in between the uprights, and the uprights are in 1/2 inch each, so it's 3 inches across. I also made it 2.5 inches tall. For the newer ones, I'm making them 3 inches tall. I just like the way the scale looked better. Here I've cut both door frames, and you can use either a knife or a hot tool to do that. Hot tool is going to leave you rougher edges, but if that's what you're looking for, if you're making this into a rustic or ruined tower, those might be perfect for you. Now I'm gluing one of these to a sheet that I textured in my episode number 44. I'll put a link up in the upper right hand corner, and that's just done by ironing a piece of aluminum foil over the EVA to get that texture. Here I'm going to glue the door onto that piece and then trim that piece to fit around the door, and that entire structure will then be glued onto the back wall of the keep. Here I've taken 2 of my 4 identical pieces, and I've chosen 2 to be the front and rear. Then there will be 2 others that will be the sides. Now I had lost the footage of me cutting these, but these are 6 inches wide by 10 inches tall. That's what I decided would work best with my number of randomizer ramps inside. If I had it to do over again, I'd only put 2 ramps instead of 3, and these would be shorter. But this is what I built for this one, and I make the mistakes, you don't have to. Here I'm marking where the door is going to go front and rear. On the front I'm making 2 marks to match the 2 sides of the arch piece. On the back I only make outer marks because that piece is a solid hole and I won't need those 2 smaller marks to line it up. So this is pretty straightforward, just a couple of marks so I know where I'm going, and move on to the next stage. Here I'm delineating which is the front, which is the rear. I'm simply writing on the inside, rear and front. For these to keep them upright, I am making sure that I write them with the lettering oriented the correct way. If I can read it right side up, I know that the piece is right side up. Now these other 2 pieces I'm using to the side are going to be the sides, and they are essentially identical at this point. So I've drawn a little arrow on them so I know which is top and which is bottom. The dice ramp at the bottom that actually ejects the dice will have a slightly different height than the randomizer ramps, so I wanted to make sure I kept that straight. All of the edges of these have 45-degree angles tapered to the inside so that when they fit together they make a square box. That's going to mostly be there to hide the seam as well as possible. Eventually I may add corner pieces on the outside of this, and that will cover the seam entirely, but for the purpose of this build I haven't done that yet. That's later down the road. This is just a prototype. Here's one of the side walls. I'm showing where the 3 ramps go and showing which way is up. Now this is the ejector ramp at the bottom. This ramp's a little different. I want an arrow drawn on that, and I put it on the inside so that you wouldn't see it once the finished product was done if you look through the hole. This is going to have tapered top and bottom edges so that it can fit in against the back wall and against the floor without leaving a gap. I don't want to potentially get a die or something like that stuck inside it. Now that's going to go here against the side, and then it's going to have support structures underneath it so it can handle things like heavy dice. And I've opted to put 4 of those across the bottom. So that's just these little wedges here. These are fairly straightforward. They are simply going to be flat along the bottom, and then you want them flat up what would be the back side so you can glue it easily to the back wall. And just attach a bead of glue on those and put them in place. You just need enough structure in here so that something like a heavy die isn't going to crush this ramp. The 3 ramps above this are generally used as randomizers. They bounce the dice around enough so that it gives you a nice random roll when it comes out the bottom. There's no way to fudge the dice. I'm attaching 3 of these. If I had it to do over again, I'd only attach 2. Now, I'm using a ramp to hold these in place and some of these little braces. I've only opted for 3 on each of these instead of 4. I just felt that 4 was kind of overkill on the other ones. You can just cut a small square and then cut it off at the angle you want. Mine are 2 1/4 by 2 1/4, and it leaves that little drop down there. Now I was worried that drop down was going to catch on the dice, so you'll see in a later segment I trim that off from that front point back to that same lower bottom point. Here I am gluing these to the bottom of those ramps. Straightforward. You probably understand how this works, but go ahead and keep that flat side flush with the tabletop so that it will glue evenly to your side walls once you're done with these ramps. You'll notice that I also come back in and just for a little bit extra support did a little weld bead of extra glue down each of these inside grooves. You don't have to do that. I tend to over-engineer all of my builds. Now here I am gluing the catch ramp at the bottom, the ejector ramp, onto the sidewall. It doesn't matter which side you choose at this point, they're identical until you get this piece glued on. So I just grabbed one, lined up the bottom edge, lined up the back edge, and went ahead and pressed that into place. Now after that, I will take my largest die I own, which is that large metal one, and make sure that I've got clearance between the randomizer ramps and the ejector ramp, just to make sure that I'm never going to get anything caught inside the tower. So that's all I'm doing here, is just checking for spacing. Here I am trimming down those ramp supports like I mentioned earlier. I didn't like that piece sticking down. I was really worried it was going to catch some dice, so I just went ahead and got that out of the way. Nothing to it here, just took the same bottom corner so that the support was there, but trimmed down to fit. Now it's time to glue on the randomizer ramps. I'm gluing those to the side wall in the same manner that I did the ejector ramp. At this point I'm still working on a single sidewall. I'll glue the other side on in a moment. During this process I want to go ahead and double and triple check just to make sure I have clearance, so I'm never going to get a die stuck in here. So you'll see me test this with the die, and then it's just 1, 2, 3, glue these on. Now for the funnel at the top, you want these rectangles to be the length of the inner gap. In my case it's 5 inches, but yours will vary. You also want the width to be slightly less than about half of the width of that opening. Now for this top edge, you're going to taper these under. This angle you want to get as, you're going to have to eyeball. You want it steep enough to have clearance so that only that very top edge attaches to the wall, but you don't want to make it so wide that you're going to have to put just tons of glue in there. Please keep your fingers out of the way of your knife while you're doing this. Now we're going to cut the trapezoids to complete the funnel. On the side away from the taper, you want to have made a couple of marks. That width is going to vary based on your measurements. I just made sure that mine was wide enough that my largest die was going to fit through there. The wider you make those 2 marks apart from each other, the shallower your funnel will be. The closer together you make them, the deeper it can get, but you can get it so wide that your edges will no longer match up. So you want to take all of that into consideration. I went at about a 45-degree angle, but it's not exactly. It's based on the width of my die. Once you've got one of those cut, you can do, as I'm doing here, and use it as a gauge to cut the other three. Always use the same one you cut first to gauge each of the others. Don't base one off another, because otherwise any errors you have will escalate. Once you've got all 4 of those cut, you want to put their edges against each other and tape them so that they are smooth. Now this is going to be on the top surface, and you'll notice that this is not going to make a complete square. That's because you've cut it at that different angle, and that's what you want. You do not want this to make a complete square. Now I'm about to have some technical difficulties here. After it comes back, I'm going to try to explain exactly what I did during the messed up footage. From here, want to pull the funnel into a funnel shape and tape that 4th side together. Then we're going to flip that over and put some hot glue into the grooves, and that's where it's going to be glued from, is from that back side. That won't be visible from the top. We're going to flip that back over and take the tape off later. We want to do this face down so that it stays level, so that it will match up with the top edge of the tower in just a moment. Once you've gotten glue into all 4 of those corners, you may want to go ahead and take some tape and hold that in place just to make sure it stays level on the table. Sometimes the glue wants to warp inside itself and it pulls the foam with it. This is purely optional. You could also, if you'd like, just sit something on top of it, and that's going to hold it level as well. While the hot glue on that funnel is cooling, I went ahead and textured my doors to look like stones. Now I just made a simple pattern with a capstone at the top and other stones to support it around the sides. Marked this with a silver marker so that it would show up on that black foam. Then I show you here in a moment that I can use a knife to cut these. I also switched to a hot tool. Not everybody has one. I just wanted to show that you could do it either way. If you've got the hot tool, it definitely makes this quicker. Remember, when you cut this, don't just cut on the front of the stone. You want to carve into the front of the stone and the sides of the stone so that it looks more realistic. You want to go in that inner arch and on the outside of the arch. Now it's time to go ahead and place the doors on. I'm just lining them up with the marks that I made earlier. I'm putting the solid back door onto the piece I decided was the rear, and I'm putting the open front door onto the part I decided that was the front. Just want to line it up with all the marks we made earlier. Now you want to go ahead and press those on pretty good. These are going to get a lot of damage. These are right at the base of the thing that's going to move, so you want to make sure that they're on there securely. Once you've got the front door on, it is going to need an arch cut out. Now you can use a knife for that or the hot tool for that. Now the hot tool is faster, but the knife is going to give you a much better, straighter, cleaner, smoother cut. For this, I definitely opted for the knife and would if I do this again. Here you're going to want to temporarily attach the front and rear. You're going to tape those edges on the same way that you did the sides of the funnel. You want to make sure that the back is on the high side of the ejector ramp and the front is on the low side, the surface level side, so that your dice are ejecting the correct direction. You want to make sure that the bottom edge is lined up. The top is less important for this because that cap will be covering that. But you do want basically the top and bottom to both be level. Line it up as best you can. For this next portion, we're creating the sides of the ejection ramp that push the dice into the middle so they go out the door. I don't have an easy way to describe this. The top needs to be level along the line that we've drawn inside. The bottom needs to meet where the door touches the front of the ramp, and the front edge needs to be flush with the inside front wall. I don't have an easy way to describe that, but you should be able to see from the pictures what I'm talking about. Just remember, the top and bottom edges must be tapered under so that they sit at an angle. For my second prototype, I've decided to use this thinner black foam. It doesn't matter what you build this with. You could build the entire thing out of different materials entirely. You could use wood, you could use foam core, you could use XPS, whichever way you want to build it. I just happen to be using EVA because I want this thing to basically last forever, and this is a fairly indestructible product. Make sure that you get these tapered edges opposite directions. On one side you want it tapered left, and on one side you want it tapered right. That way you've got one for each side, and we can create the correct funnel toward the door. Whichever side, left or right, you've already attached the ramps to, you want to go ahead and glue that ramp in as well. Put glue on the top and bottom. Trim off that excess on the front if it's going to be in the way of the front wall. You want to make sure to trim off the excess on the other side. Now the other side you're only going to be able to glue in on the bottom edge at this point because we haven't attached the other side wall yet. That's going to come in just a few moments. Here you'll see me arranging the top ramp with the funnel. Learn from my mistakes. I wouldn't even put this third ramp up here. From now, if I do this again, I will only have 2 ramps and have the entire tower be 2 inches shorter. So I'm just going to skip through this real quick and then jump to the next step. This part's pretty straightforward. We're going to go ahead and glue one side of this funnel to the wall. We're going to attach it to the same side wall that the ramps are attached to start with. Just a little bead of glue along here should be enough to hold it. You may have to come in and try to squirt some in from the side to get a little more in to hold it later, but it should do an alright job. I use a piece of tape to align it up to make sure that it's straight, but you can do that however you want to do it. It may be easier just to simply sit the entire structure upside down on your work surface and do it that way. Let's talk a moment about me making mistakes. Here, I only glued the bottom portion of the other side to the side of the ramp, both the funnel portion and the structure portion. And I did not glue it to the side of the randomizer ramps yet. I thought it would be easier to glue the front and back on first and then the side in as I went along. This is not the way I would do it again. I would simply hit all of this with hot glue instead of cold. I'm on low temp right here, and I would use high temp. I would glue the entire side on, and then I would glue the entire front on, and then I would glue the entire back on. It would have made this entire process that much easier. Please don't do it the way I'm doing it if you do this. Glue both your sides on fully and completely, and then worry about the front and rear. It will make your day easier. At any point during this build, if you feel it needs a little more glue for more structure, feel free to add it. Just make sure to add it on the side where it's never going to have a chance of catching any dice. Basically, hide your glue seams. Here you see me trying to bend this thing into all sorts of pretzel shapes, trying to get the front wall attached securely, and then the back wall, and then I move back around to the side wall and work on that. This is all a complete fiasco. Just glue your side walls together. It will keep everything else rigid, and then your back and front wall will attach more easily. Please don't do it the way I'm doing. I strongly suggest placing some glue along this bottom edge at the bottom of the ejector ramp just to make sure that it's secure against the front wall. If you are not wanting to combine your tower with your tray and you simply want the tower, as long as you've completed the tower and the upper tray, the top portion that caps it to cover the funnel, you're done. If you want to continue to make it fit with your tray so that the tray acts like a yard around the door so that it works like a keep, then you're going to need to cut a groove in the side of the tower. That groove needs to be the same depth as the inside of your tray with that piece of foam removed out of the middle of it. You want it only as deep as that. Now you want to make sure that you come to the same depth underneath your ejection ramp, and that's where you want the front of your notch to be, so that the notch does not interfere with the ramp and it will sit directly on the wall. That way your tower will be reversible. You can put it so that it will dump the dice into the tray for a rolling tower, or you can turn it around the other way so the door looks open from the other side if you're using it as a terrain piece. Mine is designed for use with my modular cave tiles, so you'll see that there's a gap. If you slide the tile under, there's too much of a gap. That's because I have put that secondary liner inside my box. If you take that out, this fits level and stays stable on the table. Time for a test drive. Here you'll see me testing it against the height of the Mini to make sure that the overhang looks good. Make sure he's got a little bit of protection up there but can still see over to shoot at enemies. And then you'll see me testing it with my large heavy metal die. You'll see me testing it with one of my smaller metal sets. You'll see me testing it with my regular purple set I use all the time. And just giving it a test run, making sure everything works. Again, showing that it works with the castle tiles, placing that under there. You'll notice that the height is correct now that I've taken out the inside extra padding. Here you'll see my original internal pad fits. Also notice that the piece that we cut out of the lower wall fits in as well. And you can use either one or both if you want a different height. Here I am attaching that lower fortification wall. You can see that I've cut a 6-inch space for the tower to fit in, and I can place the wall on there, and then I can place the tower on top of that either direction. I can leave it internal for a dice roller tower, or I can leave it external as a terrain piece if I want an open doorway. And here's a final beauty shot with a figure for scale, and you can see how nicely that looks when you place it all together.
So there you have it, campaigners. Fully functional tower with battlements. You can turn your dice tray into a functional keep for your miniature armies. You can use it as a dice roller for a little bit randomization with the dice power built in. You can use the dice tray we built last week. We've got extra additional pieces that you can add on or not. We've even got a piece left over that you can put back on if you want to fill in that gap for certain scenarios. I hope you've enjoyed it. Kind of watch me make a bonehead of myself today, and that's all well and good. I'm here to make the mistakes so you don't have to. That's about it. So remember to like, share, subscribe, hit all those other links that are on the side. Next week's gonna be a little different. That's my 1-year anniversary. By then I should have hit 300 subscribers. That's kind of cool. So I'll be here talking about myself and what's going on for next year. There are going to be some changes. I'll still be here. I'm not leaving, but you probably won't see me as often. But when you do, a little bit higher production value to these videos. So looking forward to that. See you next week, and I'll explain it all then. Thanks for coming this week. If you build a dice tower, I'd love to see it. Please hit me up on social media and let me have a picture of it. If you build a dice tray, I'd really like to see that. The dice tray is super useful. Now these are rugged. They'll take your metal dice, plastic dice, funky weird shaped crystal dice, whatever. I hope they work out for you. Hope you've been enjoying what I've been bringing to you. I love you. My name is Cross. This is Campaign Terrain. And until next week, I wish you luck in your campaign. Thanks for coming.